Anyway, I guess I'll get started. Now, my chief engineer here is Stephen. He's, where'd my wife go? Out the door? No, there she is. Stephen, I started his logbook with his mother as a life support system. And that's another long story of delivering an airplane and then getting weathered in and then coming back home, and the next thing you know, she's in the hospital having Stephen. Anyway, the FAA inspector, who was Greg Syme, if people knew Greg was a nice guy, and he said, I don't think I can accept that time between Red Bluff and Hillsboro. But anyway, Stephen's got over 30 years of corporate flying in jets, and I'm. Turn around and talk about this. No, I'm watching it right here. The picture that there with the biplane is a Waco 10. Now my uncle. You can sit so they can. Okay, my uncle Fred Zimmerly was the one that started this in 1928. He got the family going. Well, it all started in a hayfield, and it's close to here. It's over by Ridgefield, it was called Pioneer at the time. My grandfather's farm is where the Dollar Tree warehouses are. That's all. It was all my grandfather's farm, and that picture of that Waco 10 is probably right in the middle of one of those warehouses at the time. But my uncle, he was pitching hay. He said, a biplane flew by, and he said, that guy's got to be cooler than I am. So the next thing you know, he went to work and got to school at Tex Rankin's school on Union Avenue. He soloed in 1928, went on to eventually retired from Northwest Airlines in 1970. Anyway, he taught my dad to fly in 1931, and my dad was 3 years older. And then in 34, they went to Lewiston, Idaho to take over the airport there. And my uncle he had the commercial license. My dad had his private, and they had a few adventures, like all earlier aviators. They had my uncle bought one of the first airplanes from downtown Portland. Where's my mind going here? Art Whitaker. Yeah, well, no, we got it from Art, but as a Student Prince. Student Prince was built in downtown St. John's, and he had Serial 101, which is still in existence with Tim Talon, and then 102 is one that he and my dad had in Lewiston. That airplane's still flying up in Sandpoint, Idaho. And then 103, one of our members here is Summer Martell, and Summer flies corporate jets. And both Stephen and I have had a relationship with Summer, and she's still flying jets. Said she couldn't be here today because she's overnight down in Los Angeles. Anyway, my uncle flew in Kellogg, Idaho till 1934. He found out the airport operator in Lewiston, Idaho was selling out and going to Alaska. which he did. Anyway, my dad and uncle went to Lewiston, and I was less than 1 year old at the time, and my first airplane ride was on July 4th, 1934. So that puts me a little aged person here. Anyway, my uncle went with Northwest Airlines in 1938 and retired from there. At that time, they had to retire at 60. And that's a little embarrassing for me because I was flying corporate jets till after I was 80. And then they finally decided that that's enough. Anyway, Fred had student prints up in Kellogg, and he also flew a 6,000 Traveler for the mines up there. He also had this little Eagle Rock Alexander, which has got the 3-cylinder Zeckley engine in it. Had to be a real fireball, but anyway, that's my uncle and one of his partners that flew out of Kellogg at the time. And Kellogg had a big flood, and he had 700 feet of operational, wasn't the runway, but it was an area that was high ground, and he was the only communication between Kellogg, Wallace, Idaho, and Spokane, Washington. And they operated out of there on 700 feet with a 6,000 Traveler. Later, my dad had a incident with the student prints they had in October of 34, and when you got 90 horsepower that's good at sea level, standard day, and he's at 3,000 or 4,000 feet, and he's got a gentleman that's about 6'4" in the front of his student prints, they took off because that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to deliver the passenger and then take him home. Well, the student prints didn't know all that, and Elk City in Idaho is taller, shorter, and it was warmer. Off they went into the trees, and then spent the night walking to a Forest Service cabin. My uncle was out flying the Zenith trying to find them. Finally found them. Anyway, that airplane disappeared. It showed back up in this picture here. A couple of years later, somebody rebuilt it. But the airplane they bought was a Kinner Bird, and they got it over from Hazeldale. So, again, the local area was part of my history. What do we got next, Stephen?
Which student prints did he crash
Oh,
in?
263 Victor. No, that was 893 Kilo.
Okay.
102. There's our Kinner Bird that replaced the student prints, and we had that airplane till probably 37 or 38. That's airport there is the Asotin County Airport in Clarkson, Washington. And my dad and uncle moved there in 1938 and built a hangar. Then in 1939, actually it started in 38 with President Roosevelt because the Germans were causing some problems over in Europe. Roosevelt understood that Churchill was going to be short of pilots. So we had people that did not want to get into the war, but Roosevelt figured if he could start a school for pilots, both men and women, and it'd be called a civil pilot training program. And that started in our first graduating class was December 7th, 1939. And the picture Stephen's got there is when they picked up the Kinnerbird from over at Hazeldale, and then one of the J2 Cubs that we had in Lewiston, and then the Zenith, which is a big biplane. Six people sat in front and the pilot sat out back. My uncle picked that up from the bankruptcy that the airplane was in Seattle. Anyway, that airplane stayed with us till about 37 or 38, and then it finally went to Mexico. That's my uncle with 6,000 Traveler and Kellogg. That airplane eventually ended up with Johnson's over in Missoula. They had a lot of Travelers. That's my mother holding me in front of the Zenith. The Zenith is the first airplane I took a ride in 1934. This is just a typical load of fishermen that my uncle had into Moose Creek, Idaho. And one of the kids that I flew with later, he's got some family members in that picture. This is at Mackey Bar in the wintertime. And the air wheels on the Zenith, they were slick tires. So to get a little grab on the ground, my uncle and my dad put chains on the wheels and gave it a little grip when you could get stopped, because one of the fields that they flew into with one of the sheep herders was only 700 foot long, so they had to devise a way to get stopped, and that's one of the ways they did. Wasn't the first time chains were used on an airplane, because Eddie Stinson did that with one of his airplanes early in the game. That's my Uncle Fred, and I've got those two flying suits. One of them is in the museum at Lewiston, the other I've got here at Hillsboro. And my dad's just wearing his white shirt there, but you can see that Stinson or the Zenith has skis on it. They built the skis and they, being farm boys, they could do anything. You guys that are all worked in farm knew that if you needed something, you needed to build it, and so you built it. You didn't go buy it; you just built it. In McCall, Idaho, in 1939, they had a big fire up there. The last Zenith in existence is back east now, but that airplane is pictured here in front of the hangar in McCall, Idaho. And then one of the Travelers, I don't know whether it was my dad's airplane or one of Johnson's, that they were flying for the Forest Service in 1939. That's another one of, I think that's Johnson's airplane. Zenith, or the Traveler was a good load carrier and could operate off of short fields. Carry 6 people. That's my dad with one of our mechanic pilots, and his name was Ernie Pilton, and he went on to be a Air Force pilot during the war. This is in Clarkson, Washington. The Traveler is taken off. In the background is a Stinson SM-8, and that's our hangar that don't have the name painted on it yet. So that had to be right around 1938, 39. That's one of the graduating classes in 39. And it's got the Zimmerly Brothers Air Transport. The J3 Cub in the front there is 23279, and that airplane is still in existence. Not flying at the moment, but parts and pieces are still over around John Day. This is a strip called Sheer or Bear Creek in Idaho. Cessna Airmaster. My dad had 5 of those, and they worked well in the backcountry, and they also were good long-range, fast airplanes. They in 1937 they picked up the first Airmaster from Kansas, from Wichita, Kansas, and the airplanes were half again faster than anything else anybody else had. So it was an excellent airplane for charter. And that's when my dad and my uncle came back to Lewiston, picking up the Airmaster from Wichita, and they bought that airplane from Art Whitaker. Art was an old man in 1930, and I worked with Art in 1960 something, and he sold airplanes to practically everybody, and he had his operation there at Pearson Airfield, and eventually when I worked for Aero Air, they bought out Art, and then he moved over, and we were sitting in numerous business meetings when we should have been out taking care of customers, but that's another long story. This is in Kamei, Idaho. They had a salt haul, and carrying the salt to the elk and deer out in the woods. I've sent that. This is another picture around 38 when they had a collection of aircraft picking up postal mail from different small towns, like they'd fly J3 Cub or something, pick up the mail, and then they'd bring it to Lewiston and then go on to Spokane with it. And they're using the Airmaster there for that. There's my uncle in 38, and 38. The airplane they had was at Phelps Field. That's where Northwest had their base, and it was a Lockheed 10. He never had any ground school in the airplane. Never flew the airplane, but his first trip was a co-pilot, and he had the responsibility, since they're toting mail, the co-pilot always carried a gun. And the chief pilot up there said, "You don't even have a jacket." So he let him gave my uncle his jacket to wear on this flight. So it had this 1 or 2 stripes on it at the time. That was what the captains wore. But anyway, he eventually was flying DC-3s up through the Alaska out to the chain during the war. Checked out, a 1-day checkout on a B-24 and a 1-day checkout on a B-17. And he never did fly either one of those airplanes, but they had the Northwest pilots were trained in the machines in case they needed them. He did fly C-46 quite a bit, but most of it was in DC-3s. That's one of our typical loads out of Clarkston back to the backcountry in Idaho. And that was our first Traveler my dad bought in 1939.
How much cargo weight?
Pardon?
How much cargo weight are we talking about here?
Well, I think technically it was around 800-900 pounds. But like one of my commander customers I wasn't overgross or overweight. I could always get the door closed. Anyway, that's in 38, winter of 38, with 3 J-2 Cubs. That's on the Asotin County Airport. Later we had the hangar there. And that expanded as when the civil pilot training program changed in 1941 to the War Training Service. And we were assigned a Navy program in which we trained over 1,725 Navy primary and secondary students. And we've got some pictures here. We had 33 some airplanes. This is one of the typical loads. They're building a suspension bridge in Salmon, Idaho, and the cable that he had to carry in the Traveler, 40 below zero, and that's why they got the covering on the engines and then smudge pots to keep the thing warm. That's a shinier day. That's this 9842 is the second Traveler he had, and we had that airplane till after my dad was killed in an airplane accident in 49. And my mother ran the program, and then she sold in 53, and that airplane went away and eventually was used as a jump plane up at Issaquah, Washington. It's the Seven Devils over in Idaho, typical of the Idaho backcountry. He did a rescue mission on one of the Seven Devils there with the Traveler. A Forest Service guy had Rocky Mountain spotted tick fever, and they got a call, and there's no airport there. And so he said, "Well, just see if you can cut out 1,000 feet for me, and I'll come in and pick him up," which he did. And the Traveler would work real well. It's kind of like the later model airplanes that we have that are doing that kind of work today. here's a hunting party. Most of them are Northwest executives. And we flew back to 2 or 3 guides in the Idaho Clearwater, or in the Salmon River Clearwater and the Lochsaw area. And this was a family trip here. We're at Shear, and this airplane here is one my dad rebuilt in 1940. It is the Travel Air that is in the Delta Museum in Atlanta, Georgia now. And they started with Travel Airs in the end of 1931, and so they needed one that matched their original airplane, and that airplane ended up in the Delta Museum. That's our, still no name on the hangar, but that's got Cub SM-8 Stinson, the Travel Air, the Airmaster, and a Cub Coupe, and the gas pumps behind there. That later had to expand because we had 30-some airplanes operating during the war. Now they got the name on the side there, but no increase in the number of airplanes yet. And this is the beginning of the civil pilot training program. We had a couple of biplanes. One was a Traveler 16, and then a KR-34. But everything else we had was Cubs, and then we had 5 Fairchild M62Bs. Those airplanes had Warner engines on them with a nice cowling. They're like the PT-19, which had the Ranger engine in it. And hardly anybody knows about the Warners, but we had a lot of Warner airplanes. Our 5 Airmasters, 3 DGA-18 Howards, not the 15. The 18s were built by Howard to work the civil pilot training program, and they were built in Chicago, low-wing airplane, and they were real fireballs. They had about the same size airplane as a PT-19, except they had Warner 125s operating. We had 3 of them, and later I had definitions for aircraft that were underpowered, and I flew 3 or 4 of those. They look like modern airplanes, but they're circumference of the Earth airplanes. If you had a runway long enough, eventually the Earth would fall away from you and you'd be airborne. So these, during the war, Piper in 1940 was calling attention to the plight of the RAF, fight the Germans. And so Piper made, I think they had 49 because they had a prototype, but they made a Cub, silver Cub, with the rondelle, and then on the vertical fin, red, white, and blue stripes, and those are called flip fires. And we had the Flipfire Idaho and the Flipfire Kentucky, but they built 48 of those. and it was a promotional by Piper. Of course, they were making some money. That's one of the graduating classes. The superintendent of the college, he had to have a college, and he had to have a flight operation. And there, at that time, women were also included in that till the war training service came, and the and of course then the girls got bounced out. Now there's a book that my wife says don't take that.
That's another time.
That's another time, but it's called Spitfires, and it's an excellent book on the ladies that came out of the U.S., went to England, and flew for the English. This is the airplane that had ended up in Delta Museum. That's just after it was first, my dad's group first rebuilt it. The kid on the far left was unfortunately co-pilot on a B-29 over Japan just before the end of the war, and they got shot down and he was killed. His brother is sitting right next to him, and then my dad, then our maintenance chief, and then I never did get that tall fellow's name. This is more towards the start of the CPT program. The Howards you can see in front there. Then J3s, and there's a couple of Luscombs also involved. There's one of the Spitfires with the rondelle. They were silver colored with the rondelle, and then they had the vertical fin with red, white, and blue trim on it.
Was there one for every state?
Pardon?
Was there one for every state?
Every state, yeah. Every state had one. This is one of them here, and I can't tell whether that's Idaho or Kentucky.
That's Kentucky.
Kentucky? Okay.
Yep.
We had 33 airplanes. This is Idaho. A fellow, the instructor there is Clyde Martin. Clyde flew for, after the war, flew for Potlatch Force. Potlatch Force took serial number 6 Lear 23, and it was one of the first operational corporate jets flying in the U.S. at the time. And Clyde was the chief pilot for that group. There's the Air Masters, and then there's a couple of the Fairchild M62Bs, and then the Howards. The building is expanded, and then there's also a big hangar to the far left that the airplanes, the Cubs needed to be in overnight for some reason with the Navy program. They all sat like this on their noses, stacked up like this in the hangars. The Fairchilds and the rest of those all stayed outside. There's 20 Cubs, 5 Fairchilds, 2 Howards, 3 Air Masters, and a 6000 Traveler. The other airplanes that didn't match up with are parked out back. They couldn't be seen. Anyway, and that's another aerial view of the group.
What's that
Well, I'd have to get. Yeah, that's one of the biplanes. That could be either the 16 or the Anyway, there's another one of the pictures with the flip fire in the foreground there. And just a different picture of the that Traveler, the 16E, was a biplane, and it was used during the war. In fact, the young fellow standing next to my dad also was a flight instructor for me on some of the airplanes I was transitioning into after my dad had passed away. And in fact, I'm working on his birdhouse that he built. And when he passed away, his wife said, "I don't know what to do with that birdhouse." I said, "Well, I've got a place for it." So now I'm redoing the birdhouse. But he was a good instructor. He was a farmer up in Southwick, Idaho.
What's his name?
Pardon?
His name.
Oh, that's Stan Hepler. And toward the end of the war, since we had a Navy program, the Navy fixed us up with 7 N3Ns. Now, nobody liked flying them because they were heavy. They made a heck of an agricultural airplane, though, and they were tough. The Navy built them. They were all metal airplanes with fabric covering, but then they had 245 Wright 7-cylinder engines on them. That airplane right there is 682 Mike. That's when it was over in Herm Martin's field in Walla Walla. Herm had a war training service also, and that airplane is in the museum at Hood River. 682 Mike. It's colored different now, but those are the four Cessna Airmasters that were 165s. Those are during the war, we knew that eventually that we're going to catch up with the number of pilots that the military needed. As a war training service trained over 10,000 some pilots. Well, my dad knew that they were going to catch up with that the summer of 1944. So we had these airplanes, but he also wanted to start an airline intrastate in Idaho, going from Coeur d'Alene, Lewiston, Boise, Twin Falls, Pocatello, Idaho Falls. And so he started the airline with those 4 Airmasters. The other Airmaster, he had the original one. It was a 145 horse engine, and but they kept it as it was doing other things. But these were the initial airplanes that he used to start Zimmerly Airlines. If you see somewhere, I've got a Delta picture, and way over here in the corner is Zimmerly Airlines, Zimmerly Air Transport, Zimmerly Airlines, and that evolved into Empire Airlines. And I know there's an Empire now, but at that time there wasn't, because that Empire merged with Nick Bez in 1952, became West Coast Airlines. That's airplane my dad knew was flying when he got killed. That's another one. We had the certification for the Travelers with a constant speed prop. Originally they did fixed pitch prop. you had to do a little wrenching to loosen the blades and then move into a position. If you want a little more RPM, why you flatten it out a little bit. This airplane, in 1947, the first tussock moth spray job, and this was out of just north of Pullman, Washington. And years later, I was flying that airplane in the backcountry, and it's in existence still. Greg Herrick owns it. During the tussock moth spray job, my dad had an engine failure, and from the morning that they picked us up, 20 days later, the airplane was back on the job.
Wow.
And there it is, back on the job, 20 days later. And I think, this is winter of 48. The Snake River froze over, so they couldn't, the riverboat couldn't get up to the ranchers there with the feed and hay for all the animals. So we were flying all that stuff in, dropping by parachute out of the Traveler, carried 8 200-pound bags of sheep checkers. This is just sheep checkers here.
What's a sheep checker?
Well, it was a food for sheep. And we did hay and other things too, but this is a strip. This place is called Cache Creek. Later, toward the end of, if we quit boring you, we'll have a picture of flying in and out of Cache Creek with commanders. Anyway, this is a Boeing 247. In 44, my dad started with the Air Masters. The second year, he was able to get a hold of some Boeing 247s from Canada, because none of the DC-3s were available at the time. They were all in military service or airline. So his, to get, expand a little bit, these are 10-place airplanes. They were one of the first monoplane, all-metal monoplane that Boeing built. Well, Boeing was involved with Ham Standard, Pratt & Whitney engines. They had a monopoly, they thought. Well, when TWA wanted some 247s, Boeing says, no, all our production goes to United. Well, he went across the street, knocked on the door of Douglas. That was for the first DC-3. There was only one DC-3 built, but then they built 2. Well, that airplane performed way better than the old Boeing 247s. And so the history shows it that Douglas obviously commandeered the market with the DC-3, and there's one landed and taxied in Hillsborough yesterday. This is my dad, and then under the Empire logo. And that's one of the airplanes. It eventually, all ended up in Boise, and when they switched into with Nick Bez's group, the West Coast people, and so the poor old 247s were drug off into the sideline, and one of them turned into a sprayer that crashed over on Loran years later. Anyway, this is B-17 that my dad, in 47, he and one of his other pilots, Don Wolf, went to Alice, Oklahoma and picked up that Boeing and flew it up to Idaho Falls and spent the night there. It was February, and one of the mechanics that worked for him during the Empire days helped him get the 4 engines started. There were no avionics at all. Flew it to Lewiston, but to get into the river, middle fork of the Clearwater, they had to know the country, and so they found a break. Nobody talked about this, but the B-17 went down into the river bottom, flew all the way to Lewiston. They knew when they went past the lumber mill, because the lumber mill would give them a bump up. They knew then that they had a couple miles to go before the end of the runway. One was flying, the other was looking real hard. They landed, and a couple of our mechanics went down to take a look at the airplane after it parked, and they found that the bomb bay door on the thing had a tree branch in it. So they were sneaking in, but there was no alternative. You either found a place to land or you crashed. Anyway, and the Snake River Canyon, that's what, during the start of the airline, they followed the river to Boise, and there was no such thing as flying above. It was in the bottom of the river all the way. But our pilots, we had good pilots, and they made a success of it. We also got involved with people having troubles in the backcountry, and this was a Stinson from California that I went along and spent a couple nights out in the brush with my dad and 2 or 3 of the mechanics that were putting it back together to get it flyable so my dad could fly it home. This was 1950. There was a hill climb. Most of all of our mechanics were involved in motorcycles, and they're all Indian guys. And anyway, there's a hill climb down in Corvallis, and I was somewhere else with a Cessna 140. And anyway, I met him down in Corvallis, and we commandeered a pickup truck and loaded the bike on it and went for the hill climb. Anyway, then in 50, I was in college in University of Idaho, and from 51 to 55. And I got an offer from Bowler Air Service in Orofino, Idaho, to fly for them. And it's Arnie Brandt. Arnie eventually retired from Potlatch Force. Anyway, the summer of 55, I flew out of Orofino and waiting for the letter from Uncle Sugar suggesting that I needed to do due diligence with the military, and so I flew there with Abe Bowler. Abe had a Ford Trimotor, and he had two Fairchild 71s, two SM7 Stinsons, one with the picture that you saw him upside down with the right engine, and another one with the Pratt & Whitney, and then the last Fokker Super Universal flying. So I was cranked back in space. Every airplane was older than I was, except for the 39 J3 Cub. And but it was an experience flying that old stuff. And that's Jerry Wilson and I we were over in Walla Walla, hopping passengers with the Ford. That airplane's still in existence. It's down in Texas now. That's at Fish Lake, Idaho. We had 4 airplanes in there overnight. We couldn't get out. And next morning, I climbed up the windsock pole and got it loose so it could flop. It was frozen to the pole. There's some of the airplanes that we had, and they're at the Stinson above, and one of the Fords, and the other Ford, the big Ford there, that's hanging in the Smithsonian right now, 9683. It's Fish Lake, Idaho, another dangerous airport. A lot of airplanes been wrecked in there. A teacher from Pullman, and he flew in there with two guys. I can't remember what airplane, whether it was an Air Coupe or what it was, but they crashed. One guy was killed. They tried to get somebody to come in and pick up the guy that was in existence, still living. And nobody would go in there at night. But my dad and one of his pilots went in at night and picked this guy up. I've still got the letter from the lady, the wife of the fellow, appreciating somebody doing something that was not easy. To bring her husband out. That airplane crashed at Moose Creek, but a guy in Canada, and the other airplane behind that is the one that was rebuilt, but it took the N number off of the one in front because it was the original 71. And Addison Pemberton, who's done a lot of work with, built the Boeing 40 that's in the museum at Hood River. And then Addison primarily flies his Grumman widgeon, or not the widgeon, the albatross. Is it the albatross or the goose? Goose? Anyway. But flying these old airplanes,
Why
there's
was it called Dumbo?
I don't know where the name came with the airplane. I don't know where Abe got it, but it was called Dumbo. And you mentioned Dumbo to Addison, he knows exactly what airplane you're talking about. That was the one that was converted up in Canada. It was a Canadian-built Serial 37. Now it's got Dumbo's N number on it. Different color though. And there's a BT-13 in the back end there. So, and Jerry Wilson, there's the Fokker. That airplane was, Dean Wilson owned it, and he was an avid flyer person. Dean just passed away about 3 weeks ago. And he had that airplane in his hangar, and somebody set fire to it at night. And we have suspicions, but nobody really knew who. Is that me? I think it is.
Yeah.
I only flew the Fokker once, but they had me flying these Stinsons. Then I flew co-pilot on the Ford. That's me with a load at Moose Creek Ranch. And that's me with a modern airplane. With a couple of my college people. We flew down to Boise and we're doing some kind of thing with the, we're all Sigma News. Anyway, we're promoting the fraternity apparently. Jerry also got involved with TBMs and so yesterday when they were flying the TBM there at Hillsboro, I thought, well, I've got 2 takeoffs and 2 landings in those from way back when. And Jerry kept them at Herm Martinsfield, and then we'd get them up and running. Then he'd fly them over to the main airport at Walla Walla. And then one day he says, "You think you can fly one of those?" I said, "Well, I don't know." So in the evening, I went out and went around the pea patch with the thing and landed about 3 feet in the air. And the next day flew it to Lewiston, and that was my last time with a big old TBM. Swede operated those. He and Ed Ball were the ones that really used the TBMs in Forest Brand. It shut down all the Fords and all those airplanes because the TBM could carry the same load. One pilot was twice as fast, and there were still parts and pieces, available to keep them flying. Now they're all just in museums, or they're flying like it was yesterday at Hillsboro. Somebody's got a lot of money, and this airplane, the Cessna Airmaster, still working back in back east. I was in the Army at the time over at Fort Lawton, and I was taking my instrument rating from Galvin Flying Service, and I get a call from Jim Galvin. He says, "There's a guy here who's got a Cessna Airmaster. His pilot quit." Well, I learned why he quit. After a couple of checks bounced. But I was flying an airplane, it wasn't. Anyway, so that's 237 Echo, and it's still in existence, still flying.
Was that you in the picture?
Pardon?
Was that you in the picture?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's me in the picture. That's not my military uniform. That's one of our spray jobs that was down at McKenzie Bridge, Oregon. Had Ford and the Fokker, and we had a traveler and a steerman on that program. The Cessna 140 I was flying was down on the other side of the traveler. Then more modern times, Dale DeTour, you guys all know Dale. My uncle said it was his 70th anniversary of his solo. He said, "Can you get me a 170 or something? We can celebrate my 70th year of soloing." I said, "I know a Waco. It's not a Waco 10, but it is a Waco." And that was Dale DeTour. So, let's see, all of us there are all QVs, so did I fly? No.
No, Dale.
You flew Fred over to Pearson?
Yeah.
You flew. Okay, then Dale took him up to where the Waco 10 picture went early in the program here, where the warehouses are for the greengrocers or
Dollar store?
yeah. So Dale took him up over the old family farm and then landed back at Evergreen, and then I flew Fred back to Hillsboro. So we all got a chance to fly with Fred, and he was, I'd have to go back and look, but I think he was either 92 or 93 at the time. This is my cousin Sammy. He passed away. My uncle's gone. I guess I'm next in line. Stephen's there. And this is over at Evergreen, 1994. And we'd always go to the fly-ins and take tent and sleep out there under the wing. Or
Not anymore.
no. And this is with the Cessna Airmaster that started Empire Airlines. And that's Stephen, his daughter Leah, and me, and that's at Wham. That airplane was totally rebuilt by Wayne Edsel over in Bozeman, Montana. He had a stroke after he bought this airplane. The doctors in Bozeman said, "There's no way he'll even be able to tie his shoes again." There's a book that Susan Edsel wrote, Into the Blue. She and her sister got her dad back flying.
Oh,
I mean, it's quite a story. And there's some doctors in Bozeman that probably don't admit that they miscalculated the ability of these girls to get their dad back flying again. That's a picture of my uncle when he was with Northwest. He was Northwest chief pilot on the West Coast in the mid-50s. And so he was one of the first to fly the 707, and then Northwest had DC-8s also, and he was one of the first DC-8s pilots, and that's Boeing Field there. This is Cunningham Hall, which is also at Hood River now, That's Jim Blarkin brought it out of Alaska, and I happened to be in Lewiston when he stopped there, and so I took pictures of it there. And then later, it eventually ended up with Wham. This airplane is also at Wham. I took that picture in 1956 in Arlington, Virginia, and I was in the military back there. Dave Lewis, who was a pilot for Fairchild, and he had taken the Ranger engine off of this and put Pratt & Whitney on it. And Dave didn't own it at the time, but later Dave worked for us at Hillsborough, and he gave me all the history on that airplane. And that airplane now is being rebuilt at Wham. Only one of them. It's a serial number 1. And this is Channing Clark, and the Fleetwing Seabird. He always had some sweet young thing traveling with him, and he sent that as was that a Christmas card or a birthday? Anyway, Merry Christmas, yeah. This airplane had just come out of Alaska, had been up there for years, and I happened to be I was still in the service in Seattle, and this airplane was one of the Lockheed Vegas that flew up in Alaska for years, and Tallman's bought it, and I just happened to be there when it came to Renton Airport, and I took a picture of it. We done?
I think so.
There, you're tired. Everybody's bored. Oh, wait a minute. We still have, we have another little, Stephen will get us going here.
There was a picture or two that had something in the ground and the doors that opened.
Oh, that was that's the way the fuel pits were.
Oh.
Yeah, even at Hillsborough, when I first came to Hillsborough working for Swede, they had the fuel pits, the doors opened up. You taxi over them that way.
I have a little story about that place called Cash Trick. They had, to get in there, they took part of the hillside off, so when you landed, it was nothing, and then you went uphill. Well, but to get there, you had to turn in the canyon, and I swear it was that far away. And I was taking pictures. I thought I'd take, only thing that came back was the panel. I mean, I never looked.
This is
18% grade, 1,000 feet long, unbelievable airstrip, cut right out of the side of the hill. But it worked very well for quite a few years. There's a cabin right down on the end of it there.
That's Sweet Ralston's flying, and his son is doing the audio.
I caught 4 steelhead in 4.5 hours at 700 miles.
It's 1,100 foot long. What happened?
The clip ended.
Oh.
A real fun approach. You go down to the ground, around, turn around, get upstream, and get sewed up and ready to for the strip, because it shows up pretty fast. You'll see it right ahead of us now with a cross on the end of the runway. And the main thing is you're slow enough to to get around. You don't like to gun around there. You have to fly too far up the canyon to get turned around. And there's what it looks like just before you land. You touch down right as close as you can to the white cross there. I put that on there because we went in there in the evenings when it was dusk and easier to get lined up and know where you were. And there's the touchdown on Cache Creek Airport.
I was in there 8 times, 8 times with the Shrike commander, and 1 time with the early turboprop.
Barely room enough to turn around up there. The wing is in the bank, and pushing down the leads, and the nose near goes over the cliff, and you turn around, and then you head back down the hill. Then it's quite steep.
As you do.
A low wing airplane won't work there. But they
Take off downhill. This particular day, the wind is blowing up the mountain, so it makes it really easy to get off. And the only real problem is getting up there and get turned around, headed back down. You can't see the end of the strip when you first turn around, so you roll as fast as you can, come around the turn, and open it up, and away you go. About 800 or 900 feet left after the turn. And there's what it feels like. We're heading off, and the motors are open, and away we go.
Anybody been trained in multi-engine airplanes?
We should be able to try something like that.
The all the V speeds start before brake release.
And your wheels are up. We're heading down the river toward Lewiston. As soon as we're high enough, we'll turn west, by Mount Hood, over Portland, into Tillamook.
Jeez.
Wow.
Just a little. Now, that's in the 70 around 74 in that area. Those airplanes now are antiques. They're over 50 years old. Yeah. Anyway, it just shows what you can do if you got your mind made up.